Have you ever felt completely trapped? Maybe it's in a relationship or a job or just kind of a heavy season of life. I mean, we've all been there. I remember in workshops, Haydn would tell people, when you think you're trapped, look again because you are never trapped. And I could see the skepticism on their faces. I mean, it feels real. It feels like at times the walls are closing in. But it makes me think of Nelson Mandela. And after 27 years of being in prison as a South African activist, some even called him a terrorist, when he was released, a reporter asked him how he could possibly not only forgive, but then serve the people who imprisoned him. And Mandela's response was really stunning. He said, "I was not in prison," something to that effect. And when the reporter said, "Well, you were for 27 years," Mandela replied, "No one has the power to imprison me." If those circumstances didn't trap Mandela, then what is trapping you? The truth is, we're the ones holding ourselves captive. And while that can be really hard to hear, much less understand, it's actually the greatest news possible because if you built the cage, it means you also have the key. Welcome to Becoming You, where we apply spiritual wisdom and truth to your everyday life. And you'll notice we don't get caught up in politics or current events. Those are all outcomes. Here, we focus on the cause, the origin of those outcomes, and how to engage in your life in a much more conscious way. I'm Terry Hasty.
And I'm Haydn Hasty. And before we began this discussion about this so very important dynamic of endurance, I want to start off with the question, which is, how do you create the outcomes of your life, the ones that you truly desire? Or is it just luck? Is it, some people get the short end of the stick? Or are there hidden forces involved in these dynamics of human life of which we are not aware?
I think most of the time, Hayden, we just kind of go through life as it unfolds, reacting and responding, and then we get a lot of unintended outcomes.
Negativity and the issue of the blows of life or personal problems, really of almost any kind, are really a result of an existential issue. That is to say, to be specific, we think we are our experiences. We know very little, if anything, about our existence. So the mind spends its entire time out there on the periphery, slogging its way through
Trying to
everyday life.
reconcile. Yeah.
Right, trying to come to terms with what has happened and what the individual is afraid is going to happen.
Mm.
But when it comes right down to it, the outcomes of your life really reside between a couple of parameters. And you might even look at it as a mathematical equation. Now, obviously, there are complexities to this, but we're trying to simplify things so that it can be easily understood. The first parameter around which your life revolves is what you and your mind are capable of creating. And the second parameter, and this is the big one to me, is what you and your heart are capable of enduring. And so here comes the endurance piece.
If we go back to Mandela and we think about what he endured for 27 years, part of the biggest issue was he really was moved out of being an activist, doing, into not even being able to be interviewed by anybody. He was 27 years basically cut off from what he would consider his external mission and purpose. But what I think actually happened was a forging of the internal, and that's the endurance that is more of a passive experience than one of putting your nose to the grindstone and pushing through.
Well, it's like Sri Aurobindo when he was put in the Alipore prison for a sedition by the British, and he was in meditation, and he heard this voice say, "Turn to thy work for which I have brought you to jail." So, a lot of the great ones
Yeah.
will, they use those circumstances to transcend and to transform. The rest of us is just trying to figure out how to get through the day.
Waking up at 3 in the morning thinking, "Oh
Right.
my
Oh,
gosh,
God.
what's gonna happen?"
Right. And nothing happened, but we started imagining the worst, et cetera, et cetera.
Uh,
But let me say that again just for clarity's sake. Life residing between the two parameters of number one, what you and your mind are capable of creating, and number two, what you and your heart are capable of enduring. And before you think the second one is the most demanding, I encourage you to look again, because the first one can also take you to the edge of what you're capable of enduring, but in a real positive, healthy way.
and both require courage, but the good news here is we're not alone. We're not on our own, and that's what we're going to kinda dive into.
And not alone, not meaning someone else per se,
Right.
but different parts of ourselves. So let's get off with a good foundation of that. And this is, to me, is so very important because before we discuss endurance, let's go ahead and ask the question: who is enduring? Who is the one that is dealing with the difficulty? Who's dealing with the failure, the setback, the loss?
So who is imprisoned, in other words?
Yes, exactly. So behind the scenes, of which we have very little contact or knowledge, there is the soul. And I want to try to clarify here and be very careful about what I'm saying because I do not want to misrepresent this. Let's talk about the soul for a minute. There are really two sides of the soul. There's the one side, it's the part of you, as we have been told, is eternal. The soul does not take birth, it does not come into the body. It is one with the divine. You might think of it as that which it is the you that is above you, so to speak, above the head, so to
So it
speak.
isn't born and it doesn't die,
And
and
it
it
doesn't
also
die.
doesn't get scarred and trampled throughout the
It's not
process
possible.
of life.
I mean, you hear people say things like, he sold his soul. That's not possible. The
Mm.
soul is not sellable. Now, you sell your ego out any day of the week, and you can watch video after video of people doing
Yeah.
that.
But we can deny the soul.
Of course,
Yeah.
but even, and I want to be compassionate about this, it's not that we deny it, we're not aware of it.
Mhm.
And because that's kind of where we are in the evolutionary process. We are just starting to wake up to what I refer to as the journey of the soul, which I think all these times and the collapse and all these difficulties we see on a global scale, that's what I think these are about. We are beginning the process of waking up to this. So you do have that side of the soul, and sometimes you hear people use the phrase innate image. And this is really it's synonymous with the soul in a way. It's your highest, most immutable essence. Just it's perfect. It is unchanging. You might think of it this way: it's the blueprint of your divinity.
Hmm.
It is the blueprint of who you are as a spark of the divine. But like I said, it stays above you. It's not subject to the messiness and the ups and downs of everyday life. It is, and you are the spark of the divine. But then there's this other part of when we refer to the soul, and it's what I like to think of as the personality of the soul, the representative of the soul. It's the evolving part of the soul, and that is referred to as the psychic being. The psychic being does descend into the body. It goes through the birth process, it goes through the death process, because it's the one that's doing the work of evolution, of moving you closer and closer to the spiritual realization of who you really are. And so it is the one that carries the lessons learned from lifetime to lifetime. So you might a good analogy is think of the soul as the king
Or the queen.
or the queen. Sorry, thank you so much. And the psychic being as its ambassador. So, once again, and this is important, we'll come to it later, but the soul is above the head. But the psychic being is behind the heart center. In the Vedic scriptures, it's described as the size of a thumb. And it can be very helpful, at least, to consider that there is this higher part of you. The soul is realized through an upward movement, through an ascent. It is a movement toward the divine. But the psychic being is realized on more of a perpendicular route. It is an inner movement towards the heart, an inner journey that takes over.
The psychic being is like, the mother describes it as there. I love that behind the heart center. It's our ambassador. It's like our ally to help us hook into this higher part of ourselves because the ego is really constantly feeling under threat and just scrapping for control. But then quietly behind your heart is this ambassador, this psychic being. And other people would call it the watcher or
The
the
observer,
observer
the
that
witness.
right, the one that's within. It's
Yeah.
not hollering for attention because it doesn't need it. It's also eternal and perfect. But there it is as a friend, as, a guide to us, if we can just, as the mother says, pull back the veil of the ego and allow ourselves to, feel it, to engage with it, and to come from that part of ourselves that is constant and is not under threat.
And I don't have a problem calling it a friend as long as we understand that it is who we are.
Mhm.
And so, in that sense, we are not alone. There are these higher parts of ourselves that are available to us. If you contrast the two, the soul represents, you could say, liberation. It's freedom. It's not through death or nirvana or heaven. You always hear people say, "Well, they're in a better place now." But that's not really what the soul is up to. The soul experiences the liberation, the freedom, right smack dab in the physical. The psychic being, though, consents to working with the blows of life. It consents to using and working with the negativity that your mind creates. But the psychic being doesn't own the negativity, and most importantly, it does not identify with it. So that is that pure part of you that is waiting upon you to discover that part of you. But it uses the negativity and the unbearable circumstances in life that we all face at some time as a tool to reach that transformation and that transcendence, but it doesn't identify with it. It's really kind of the same thing as a weightlifter using weights or a cyclist using the pedals to go up a big hill. It's the resistance that the psychic being uses to create that transformation and that the soul uses to create liberation.
So anything negative that you have determined to be true about you, whether it is, I am worthless, I'm not lovable, I'm dismissible, I'm not as smart as other people, whatever that negative thought or thoughts are, it's really just the friction that the soul and the psychic being can use to help me kind of wear away like a oyster, taking a grain of sand and turning it into a pearl. Is that kind of an analogy for
To me, it's not an analogy. It's a precise understanding of how the soul and the psychic being operate in terms of the difficulties that we face in life. It uses it as a tool for realization. But of course, we're not conscious of that. We're not aware of that. So we're up at 3 o'clock in the morning. Oh my God, what if? Or, look what happened. This isn't fair. How could this have happened to me? That's the ego. The problem is that in terms of evolution, we're not exposed to this kind of understanding growing up. So by the time we do get exposed to it, we're already crazy. We're already, dealing with negativity in just a very unconscious way. but that's okay.
Uh,
That's part of the process of finally waking up and realizing there's something else going on. The hidden forces, the invisible footprints of life itself that await us.
when we moved from, the house that Beverly and Gary Adams, let us live in so graciously. I mean, we paid a little rent, but not what they
Not
could have
much.
made when we first got married. When we moved, I found this journal that I kept when I was, going through a divorce, and, of course, I was a single mom with a two-year-old, and, oh, it was so pitiful and sappy. I think I set fire to it. I'm like, "I kinda don't want anybody to ever find this." But I was in the process of feeling, I mean, my whole life was being dissolved like the caterpillar in the goo, but just like the caterpillar, I had done that to myself. I had, woven that around myself, and then I didn't like the dissolution process, which I don't think anybody does. But when I look back on it, could it have been more perfect?
I've always found, and I say this authentically because this happened to me. I've always found one of the saddest parts about dealing with the blows of life is when nobody wants to hear how sad you are about dealing with your blows of life anymore because they've heard your story a million times, but we keep telling it, this
Yeah.
is what happened to me, et cetera, and there's no truth in it. That's the problem.
Mhm.
It's
If
the
we could tell it.
experience we had. It's the experience we had, but the experience does not represent truth. The truth is gonna be found in the existence.
But if we could tell the story from the truth, they would want be a lot more
It wouldn't be
interested.
negative.
True.
That's the issue. It wouldn't be negative. You would be speaking about transformation and liberation and how your life was transformed as a result of going through that. And that happens to a lot of people afterwards, where we're able to see in retrospect, "Oh my god, that's what this was for."
Because the
You know,
truth is always expressed in the positive,
always.
not
It's
in the
never
negative.
expressed in the negative. And speaking of which, when you die, your lower nature that contains all that negativity, when you die, all of that emotional insanity and everything that you housed, and it just dissolves. It dissolves eventually. But what the psychic being who took birth with you and is taking death with you, what it does is it takes the essence of the experience, not the detail, but the experience. It doesn't carry the negativity with it. It carries the essence of the experience of having struggled with those knots or the barriers, the losses, the blows of life. But those knots and those difficulties, they can be. I wanna be careful here. I wanna slow down just a hair because this is important. But those knots, the KNOTS's of our life, those problems that we create inside of ourselves, those knots, they can be stored within the subconscious. And so the karma of those knots, which is real, can be picked back up in another lifetime, in the next lifetime. And I have experienced that myself in this lifetime. So I speak about it with sincerity. This is not just an intellectual thought.
Or even will cycle back to that knot in this lifetime.
Same
So
thing.
you don't
It'll
even
f-
have to or think about another lifetime or
it,
believe in other lifetimes. It can cycle back around in this lifetime for sure.
well, it will find its way towards recreating itself because it was not solved before. So now it's going to be solved,
And then we say, "Why does
again.
this keep happening to me?"
As an exercise we used to do with groups where everybody had to take, we'd get in a circle and everybody would take the person's, you take your right hand and you take their left wrist. And when we would say go, you have to take the person's left wrist and start hitting yourself in your head with it while yelling, "Why is this happening to me? Why is this happening?" Because we do it to ourselves. And this has a lot to do with this conversation with endurance, because I want to start off by asking this question: who is enduring? Is it your ego? Is it your psychic being? Is it your soul? Are you above the blows of life? Are you inside working with the blows of life? Or are you identified with the blows of life and being crushed and trampled as you move through that process? We're not conscious of this, of understanding the truths of who we are, and we need to increase our consciousness and knowledge of how our beautiful selves truly work, because you are not who you think you are.
I was curious in getting ready for this conversation today, Hayden. I was curious about the difference between perseverance and endurance. And perseverance, according to Webster's, is basically more a physical action. I'm persevering through something that's strenuous or difficult, either mentally or emotionally, physically, certainly. But endurance is more of a passive, internal moving through with courage and patience. And to me, that's more challenging than the doing, because persevering, we're used to, like, put our nose to the grindstone kind of thing. So the soul views the blows of life or enduring from a detached position, like watching a movie. It sees the, difficulty as a necessary part of the plot or just part of the unfolding, and it witnesses the pain, but it doesn't feel the pain. The psychic being, on the other hand, is right there in the middle of the darkness with you. So it is looking for, as you were saying before, Hayden, the essence of the difficulty, not the details of it, which can be so painful for the personality. It can be so painful for me, the individual, while I'm going through it. But the psychic being is looking for the essence of it, and what is there in this experience for me to learn? What is the divine trying to teach me? So
It can meet those negative circumstances with an immense strength that the ego does not have, because the ego can be moved off center by a word, by a moment. But the psychic being can bring this immense strength, a spiritual strength, not necessarily a physical strength to the situation.
And that's why I really love the, life of Nelson Mandela in this context, because the interviews that happened after he was released from prison, he talked about exactly what you were just saying, this immense strength to forgive people, because he said there's no value in holding on to that. That's just the ego, and we have to unify. We have to see the freedom of each individual human being. And I just find that to be, like you said, this quiet strength. And essentially, the psychic being can still say, I understand how difficult this is, but I'm also, through this experience, becoming a more perfect human
It's
being.
revelatory. It
Mm.
is a sculpting. It is a forging. It's how it refines its consciousness. It's how it refines the beauty of itself through moving through difficulty.
But Hayden, it's important to remember that the ego is what moves into resistance, and obviously it wants to protect itself even while it's being annihilated by the circumstances. I'm still in resistance to what's happening. It sees the difficulty, as wrong or unjust, even evil. Why, again, why is this happening to me? And it starts to perceive that my life is just about suffering. So if I could draw a picture of it, if we were at a whiteboard together, I would put the ego out on if we have circles, I'd put the ego out on the outer circle. It sees nothing but resistance, difficulty, death, meaninglessness. And then in the next circle in, I've got the psychic being, which sees those events that the ego's in such resistance to with meaning, and it sees the purpose of it. And then we've got the soul at the very center, who understands the purpose of each event and the unfolding. So the question becomes, who is enduring? Is it the center there at the soul, or are we out on the periphery? Because that is going to determine the outcomes in your life. If I'm out on the periphery with the ego, I'm going to have very different outcomes than if I can be closer in at psychic being or even at the center with soul.
Well, take a look at something that you just said. When we are dealing with difficulty out on the periphery, or we're working the situation through the mind, and you explain step by step why it happened. Well, she did this to me, and he did this, and she didn't, and he didn't. And what happened next was, and why did, once you're done explaining, nothing is known.
Nothing's
You
resolved
still do
either.
not
Yeah.
understand why it happened. Why is this occurring? But as you are aware, you have friends that have been through difficulties, and they told you, had this not happened, I couldn't have X, Y, Z. People say, had I not learned these things in my first marriage, I couldn't have the great marriage that I have now. So the meaning is there in the difficulty, but now we have to find it. And that can create a great shift in how we begin to view it. So, kind of to summarize here about the soul psychic being an ego thing, when it comes to enduring, the soul is just completely unaffected. And the psychic being sees the meaning, or at least is seeking to find the meaning, and the ego doesn't see anything but death and meaninglessness and gloom and doom. Oh my God, if this happened, what can happen next, etc. So let's start off with this question as we go into endurance. Who is enduring? Because that is going to determine the outcomes of the difficulty that you're dealing
Well,
with.
and to wrap up the Mandela story is if he had come out and his focus had been on revenge or retaliation or justifying and complaining and blaming, which, is very tempting, then no one would even remember him. But he's remembered as a peacemaker, as somebody who could unify other people because he was coming from center, not from out there on the periphery. And that's why it makes such a difference in the outcome of our lives when we answer that question you just asked, who is enduring? Because if I'm enduring out there on the periphery, I'm going to get beat
You're
up.
not going to make it.
No.
You get slaughtered,
Yeah.
and that's okay. That's a tremendous learning
Oh.
lesson. But is it necessary? And the answer is no. This is why our work is focused on transformation through spiritual realization. Some people just call it the Gita. In the Bhagavad Gita, there are, I always make the mistake of saying there are 3 chapters, but there are actually 18 chapters, but there are 3 sections. And the third section of the Gita is referred to as jnana yoga. And what is jnana yoga? Jnana yoga is the yoga of knowledge and wisdom. And that's what we are focused on in this work, because I believe with all of my heart, with an increase of wisdom, you get an increase of proficiency and competency in the mind and the body and the emotional framework. But without that, you can still make progress, but it seems to me that it is slower.
And we all face difficulties in life, and some, take us right to the edge. And I've listened to a lot of people's stories, and I've told my own. A lot of podcasts are about people's stories, and there's nothing wrong with that. But without the question, excuse me, but without question, the story is just part of our purpose and destiny. And it's the same for all of us, which is transformation. So the story itself, it's not that it's not powerful or inspirational or sometimes sad, but really the whole purpose of it is to move into transformation.
So you see, if that's true, there's no such thing as negativity.
Hmm.
And my mind just said, what? What are
Well,
you talking about? Of course there is.
they're temporary difficulties or negativity in life, but we tend to then color our whole life with it. The mind has the tendency to say, oh my gosh, chicken little, the sky is falling, to color all of our life with a temporary difficulty. And how long they last is often very contingent upon how we're looking at it. The
It is
doom,
it is mathematically proportional to the level of consciousness that you are working out of.
well, if we're not conscious,
you just have reaction, then it's not really a thought. It's just a reaction. It's addictive as to how you have tried to figure out how to survive all the negative stuff before.
And that's how the doom of the little situation gets translated into the gloom, like the whole of life or the whole entire
Right.
situation. But endurance, just through what we call the triangle, if I'm just trying to endure through my mental, through my body, through my emotion, it really is going to lead to repetition of that event or an event that looks like it, or what we call the circling tracks, because it's really the mind, body, and emotions are only paying attention to the effects. We don't really understand the cause.
So I want to interject again with this very similar question. Who is seeking the cause?
Well, in that case, the one seeking the cause was the hurt one, the one that didn't know what was gonna happen next, the one that felt, uncertain about the future because of finances, because of support, all kinds of things, and this endurance, when it's just through content, that's when we feel trapped, but content, if we can't apply the context, the bigger picture, if I can't say, okay, this sucks, this is hard, but this unfolding is part of the process. It's part of me getting refined like a grain of sand to a pearl and asking myself, "But why is this happening? And what
Because
was my part in it? And why would I choose this?"
in the experience I had in 1987, I was allowed to see that I had chosen the circumstances of abuse in my childhood. When I was allowed to see that, I went, oh, okay, now I get it. And so it's no longer abuse.
And then we can let it go.
You get to redefine not only the situation itself, but you get to redefine yourself.
But the opposite of that, Hayden, is endurance. If I'm just doing it through content or through the physical, it really leads to addictions of all kinds, whether it's the addiction to drama or the addiction to another person or to substance, because the very cells of the body know that life is not supposed to be this hard.
Endurance through context is more powerful because it provides meaning and purpose, even if you can't see it. So it's not that it provides it, it is embedded in it. No such thing as a random event. Everything is tied to meaning and purpose and rhythm. And so it suggests that whatever it is that's happening is perfect for your growth. It's part of the evolutionary path that you've chosen. And if you can't see the meaning, and I understand that, that can be really difficult to do, just being aware that there is an intended destiny in the encounter of this event can be comforting to the individual. You may not know what it is in the beginning, but it will reveal itself in time, particularly if you are seeking it. So, this kind of endurance operates through wisdom and knowledge that truly can lead to creation and transformation and transcendence. But see, now you begin to realize that you are not alone. You begin to realize that you are not who you thought you were.
And I was thinking about when we first got married and we were in that bed that Bobby Richardson gave us, and we were in the house that Beverly and Gary let us have for half the price they could have received in rent for that. And I remember lying in bed thinking, when is this going to get easier? When is this going to get better? And I knew it would. I did have it, but I really didn't understand the context. I didn't understand the purpose of the pressure we were under and the compression and the difficulty. And I didn't know the purpose of what we were going through, but I had you to go through it with, and that makes a huge difference. What came to understand, I didn't understand it then, lying in bed thinking, when is this going to get easier? Is that the pressure and the compression and the difficulty was serving as a propelling force for us, not only in our life together, but in the work that we were beginning to create. And if we can get to the place in our lives where we know in the midst of the contraction, in the midst of the difficult times, this is part of my progress, that contraction always leads to expansion. And if I can be in the midst of being squeezed to participate in a way that it's less resistance and more
Awareness
awareness.
and knowledge.
Right.
As best you
Endurance.
can.
Endurance.
Uh,
Right.
right, as best you can. If I had to simplify what that intended destination is, it's very simple. It's trying to burn off the old. That's what
Mm.
it's trying to do. It's trying to get rid of the old parts of you. It's trying to create a path to the new, but it has to get rid of a lot of the old stuff first. And I would suggest that is precisely what we are witness to in the world today, of watching this massive accelerated process of burning off the old.
And I think it's important too that I was definitely the creator of my circumstances, even though I wanted to blame someone else or some others, you know. I had a couple people on my little hit list of who
Right.
I wanted to blame.
Everybody has a hit list.
But what is really empowering the freedom that we can access is understanding that I am the author of my own sadness, of my difficulties. You're the author of your anxiety. And I think the mind has a hard time with that. But your existence really cannot be separated from the soul and the psychic being, that inner blueprint that you mentioned a little bit ago. We can't be separated from that. And that's where our freedom lies, that we say, okay, I'm not a victim to this. I'm not powerless in the face of these things, that I've actually chosen these. The highest part of me chose it because it knows that not only am I safe and unthreatenable, but that this is a dynamic that's going to help me grow and come closer to my forged, enduring steel, steel wrapped in cotton.
Well, it's like a conversation I was having with Robert one time, and I was complaining about this particular individual. And Robert looked at me and said, "Well, let me ask you something." I said, "Sure." He said, "What did you do to cause her to treat you this way?" And I went, "What? I didn't do anything." And, and there we are, right there in the ego. I didn't do anything. So why did this happen? The question in having to deal with endurance is not, why did this person do this to me? The question is, what is there here for me to learn? Why have I drawn this to myself? Now, you may not understand or even see any kind of relationship between what you've done and what has happened, but you may as well go ahead and ask that question because you're stuck in the circumstance anyway.
So when you're in the process of enduring, the main objective is learning how to bear the weight, with patience, with courage. It's kind of, as I said before, it's kind of a passive process in a way. Bear the compression, and that is best approached through increasing our spiritual understanding of how things work, the invisible dynamics of what's the essence of what's happening at the level of existence, not just looking at the experience. And that allows us to work with the difficulty, with the contraction, feeling trapped, to literally choose the circumstances as a path in life. I mean, it's happening anyway. So the resistance is what makes it last longer. And while we're in it, say, okay, this boat is going over the waterfall and I am in the boat. So how do I want to move through this? I'm going to choose it, be as conscious as I can be in the midst of the downfall, and literally embrace it. And that's where that core strength will actually be accessed, rather than flailing around, losing my paddle, just going over
Well,
the falls.
there are hidden forces in this, and this issue of dealing with difficulty. And one of those is, to me, I'm not smart enough to see the math behind it, but I do know that it is mathematical. It is mathematical because the size of the problem is mathematically proportional to the size of transformation that
Mhm.
awaits. So if one were to truly understand that, one would seek in a very healthy, positive way the darkness. I know that sounds a little strange, but you would seek to confront these parts of yourself that are unevolved, that have not been refined, instead of, avoiding them and hoping that everything works out. It is mathematical.
So, as you rise above your mind and you seek these higher spaces, you can increase your balance. I think about a ballerina that pulls in to spin faster. They're pulling in and moving internally rather than grasping for straws outside of ourselves.
Well, in the greater truth of who you are, and now we can bring the psychic being and the soul into the equation and into the arena of the problem itself. The knowledge of who you are and the will that is associated with that knowledge is not divided as it is in your mind. What I suggest that you notice is that everything ends.
Hmm.
Everything end, jobs end, every single relationship will end through death or divorce or separation. Everything ends. Everything in that way will fail you if you have placed your well being outside of yourself in the periphery, in the everyday life of things, like in money, in power, in fame, whatever it may
Or even
be.
another person, but you can increase your balance and sense of well-being even in stressful situations. We can maintain kind of a sense of cosmos of coming in again like the ballerina of order and rhythm even when it feels like things around us are falling apart.
Well, this is the one thing that will not fail you, and that is truth, spiritual truth of how your magnificent, beautiful self works from the inside out, of how the world itself is a manifestation of the divine, seeking to realize that truth about itself.
So the endurance we're speaking about here is not physical or mental endurance. It is spiritual endurance.
And what it means is that at that higher level, and I know this is hard for the mind to accept. It means that you are unthreatenable. It means that you are and always have been and always will be, and this is big, safe. It means that you don't need anything from anybody for any reason to be okay. And you can drive yourself crazy, dealing with the difficulties in life with your mind, but the timeless and the spaceless and the invisible, which is indivisible, is not bothered by your mischief. It's not bothered by my mischief and my
Mhm.
stupidity. But we might want to be bothered by it so we can stop learning through catastrophe and suffering, which is what here we are again in the United States. Here we are again learning the same old way. You can start learning through conscious choice and versus the unconscious self-imposed suffering.
I really like, Hayden, your use of the word mischief. I'm not downplaying when we make genuine mistakes that we need to take responsibility for. We all do that. But sometimes we've just made some little mistake and we don't have to keep beating ourselves up over it. We're learning, we're evolving. We didn't come here perfectly formed, as human beings. That's why we're here. That's why the psychic beings are ambassador to help us, as a guide and as a lead if we would let it.
Well, the good news is that at some point in your evolution, you will see this. You will have an experience of your psychic being that I believe everybody has had, whether it's in a dream or you're in a situation where all of a sudden it came together and you understood what had truly happened. And you'll get to a point finally at some point in your life or in another lifetime where you'll get behind all the pain and all the failures, and you'll see something else that is really going on. And that something else is definable. That something else is the joy of the dancing. It's the joy, the immeasurable, incredible life that you have figured out how to live through this higher understanding of yourself, of how to bear the unbearable and how to translate and transform negativity and darkness into some of the most incredible experiences, redefining experiences of your life, because that is who you truly are.
Any limitations that we put on ourselves, we can think of them as chains or imprisonment or being trapped, all of those. They're not going to be transformed. We're not going to break free of those until we attain a different understanding of the chains or the limitations themselves and ask, why did I choose this? I am confined, I am constrained, but why would I create this for myself? Why am I in this situation? What is the purpose of this self imposed imprisonment? And there's nobody who's not in prison in some way. But for whatever reason you did it, the reason is magnificent because really that's all there is. Everything's either good or it's working toward the good. And I understand, how hard that can be to get because things often don't feel good. I always hesitate to say this because I've struggled with this and have come to terms and believe now that it's true, but it took me a good bit of soul searching and maybe even journaling to get to this. Nobody did anything to you. Nobody did anything to me. We do it to ourselves. You did it to yourself. And I know that the mind, the ego, does not want to accept this, but our anguish, our suffering, our why is this happening to me? The unfairness of it all, it still has one goal. And I, like you were saying, hey, I just want to pause here because that one goal is joy. And you have felt it at times, even when there was no reason externally for you to be feeling it. You even through sorrow and anguish and loss, we have the bliss of existence. We have the joy of love, for example, even in the loss of the person that you love.
The privilege of being here to deal with the
Mhm.
difficulty, but that can take some time, to realize. And so spiritual realization, the wisdom of that existence and the privilege of being in the physical body to have these incredible experiences is really one of its intended goals. And so I know this may sound absurd, but there is this privilege that's involved in facing and enduring an insurmountable obstacle. I think it's one of the greatest experiences a human being has, particularly if that obstacle is of an internal nature, not solving like my car broke down and figuring out how to get it fixed. I'm talking about something inside of you of overcoming an internal barrier. And we all have those. Those are the knots, the KNOTS, that are part of our evolutionary process.
And sometimes I have been very good at that, and other times I just go down into the ditch with the mind, body, and emotions negative ground of being. But I still, and that's the purpose of this conversation, I still can hook back into that higher understanding and not stay in the ditch very long.
Well, we all can, and we can decrease the amount of time that we are in the self-imposed and
Mm.
start taking responsibility for where we are. And this has a lot to do with whether two things really. Once again, who is enduring? Is it you and your ego? Is it your psychic being? Is it your soul? And the other question is location. Where are you doing the enduring from? Are you doing it out there on the periphery, out there in everyday life, or are you doing it from the center of your being? Because that is where you want to do it from.
Two very different experiences.
And two very different outcomes. The more one moves to center, the more it accelerates. I got ready to say the faster the process evolves. When you go out into the peripheries, time slows down to where you just it's like being just
Sludging.
obliterated, and only 5 minutes has gone by. It feels like a whole day, and we've all had those experiences. So when you're faced with a hardship, do the best you can to shift your location, your center of gravity to the center of your being, away from your ego, and away from the periphery and do the best you can to move to the center of your cosmos and do the best you can to ask for, you know, the clarity, the advice of your psychic being, of that higher part of you, and keep it real. I sure could use some help here. I sure could use some clarity here.
Who better to ask for help than from the ambassador from the soul?
Exactly. And seek the meaning of the situation. And this is so hard to do, but to embrace it. Embrace the difficulty as a mechanism of growth and expansion and transformation that you have created, that you have somehow drawn to yourself. What is it that is trying to happen here? What is trying to break through? There's so many stories that Terry and I could tell about these circumstances because Terry and I have lived through much of this to be able to share some understanding. I'm certainly not touting myself as an expert in this because if you do, then I promise you, you'll end up drawing a circumstance to yourself that knocks your knees out from under you. But I would like to go old school here just for a second. I'm going to go back to Rocky One and the song the band Survivor created for that movie. And I think it's like the second or third verse in it. And this is what it says. And it says, so many times it happens too fast. You trade your passion for glory. Don't lose your grip on the dreams of the past. You must fight just to keep them alive. It's the eye of the tiger. It's the thrill of the fight, rising up to the challenge of our rival. So I want to ask this question. Who is the rival? It's you. And you know the one I'm talking about.
It's that one that's so attached to the chains, the limitations, well, I would if I could, but look at me, I can't, I'm not as smart as, I'm not as I'm good as, I'm really kind of mediocre. And the ego loves to say that because then I'm not responsible for the
And
outcomes.
it's also the one that is attached to the outcomes. This is what has to happen. This is the way it's going to be, etc. And that is part of that unconsciousness playing out in the ego and dealing with difficulty and in really hard circumstances because it insists that it has to be a certain way or turn out a certain way, and it's not going to.
And that brings me to something, Hayden, that you just helped me connect a dot, that a shortcut to the endurance, which is quite challenging, whether it's mental, emotional, or spiritual, but a shortcut is surrender. To go with the way the water is going, because swimming and paddling upstream is so much more difficult. To surrender to what's happening, not in a giving up way, but in a conscious way, like, okay, this is happening. So why is this happening? And what is there in this for me to learn, to surrender, to let the old you, kind of your true rival that you were
Correct.
just talking about, to let that one go, to let her die away.
It's the shadow. And this, it's easy to say to let that part of yourself die, but there is a science to it. And the science is contained within consciousness itself because we will have to do that time and time again, lifetime after lifetime, to let the old die. And if you don't want to do that, that's fine, but you will learn the hard way. And you will let go of the old self, but you will learn through catastrophe and hardship. In one of the most difficult circumstances I ever dealt with in my life, the circumstances took me to the edge of what I was capable of enduring, and I just wanted to die. I just wanted to quit because it was just so hard.
You did quit for a little bit,
I
very
did.
short amount of
Right.
time,
I
but
had to though
sure.
because there was nothing else I could do. I was not going to be able to change the circumstances. So I was in the process of learning firsthand to die. And it's tough work. But when we begin to understand the science behind it and the truths behind it, that you are not who you think you are so much more, then it makes it so much easier. It's why the great ones can say, the Christ of the world say, you have no power over me,
So
and that is true.
So that really brings us to the key question of our time together today is who is enduring? Who is facing the difficulty? Is it the ego or is it the infinite within? As Hayden said, you are so much more. I'm so much more than how I normally think of myself. You are so much more than how you think of yourself. Our greatest safety, if not really the only true safety, that you possess is within you. It's that truth of who you are, the spark of the divine in your physical body, but you're traveling through time and space. But again, not on your own. You have the psychic being right there behind the heart. And here you are
Because
in
it's who you are.
right and seeking to realize the truth instead of identifying with that old, worn out, negative ground the being that you came up with in kindergarten, to use the circumstances, the difficult ones and also the joyous ones.
Let me supply one more example here. So I want to really highlight what you just said. It's the why does the psychic being do why does the soul take on difficulty? Why does it choose really hard circumstances for many individuals prior to birth? Because of this. Knowing something and experiencing something is very, very different. For example, you know that you love your child. You know that you love your beloved. But what do you want? Do you want the knowing or do you want the experience of that? We literally are dying for the experience of the truth of who and what we are. So we know that difficulty has a lot of buried treasure to it, but it is the experience of it that gives you a truth that will be with you forever, that no one can ever take away from you. And that is why the soul chooses it. Knowing it is one thing. I don't give much credibility to that. Experiencing it is transformation.
And it comes down to the choice of how do I want to experience myself? Nelson Mandela could have come out of prison and been embittered, angry, seeking revenge, but of course he chose a whole other route, which is why we speak about him, and he has that legacy of love and unity. So if this is something that you'd like to explore in person with people that are on the same kind of path of trying to understand how do we create the outcomes in our lives more consciously, we would love for you to join us at the Omega Institute. We'll be there July 31st through August 2nd. You can find out more about that. You can register to come. It's a beautiful campus. It'll be a wonderful weekend. On our website, which is truthspringasheville.com. Also at truthspringasheville.com, you will see more information about our online community, which meets monthly, and that is the Becoming You journey. So thank you so much for joining us today in this conversation of enduring. And next week, we'll be talking about its counterpart of creating.
So I want to, one last statement that I want to make as we end. Each one of us can learn to face the difficulties of life with an absolute certainty that whatever it is we face, we have the ability to use that event as a path of transformation and transcendence. And the veil between ourselves and God begins to thin. Thank you so much.
We'll see you next week.